The Noongar people, one of the largest Indigenous groups in Australia, face significant socio-economic challenges compared to the broader Australian population. One key indicator of this disparity is income, with estimates showing that the Noongar people earn significantly less on average. The annual income of the Noongar population, estimated at $1.15 billion, constitutes only about 10% of the total food expenditure for 2.2 million people, each spending $100 per week. This percentage illustrates a stark contrast in purchasing power and disposable income between the Noongar people and the mainstream population. While this calculation is based on basic income and expenditure, it reflects a broader socioeconomic gap that exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Historical dispossession and land loss. The colonisation of Australia resulted in the displacement of Noongar people from their traditional lands, leading to a loss of access to resources and economic independence. This historical dispossession still reverberates today, affecting land ownership, housing, and economic development opportunities. Historical dispossession and land loss. The colonisation of Australia resulted in the displacement of Noongar people from their traditional lands, leading to a loss of access to resources and economic independence. This historical dispossession still reverberates today, affecting land ownership, housing, and economic development opportunities. Lower income levels. Indigenous Australians, including the Noongar, face persistent income inequalities. Nationally, Indigenous Australians earn significantly less than their non-Indigenous counterparts. The median weekly income for Indigenous Australians, according to the 2016 census, was around $441, compared to $662 for non-Indigenous Australians. This disparity is further reflected in high unemployment rates and reduced opportunities for stable, well-paying jobs in Noongar communities. Education barriers. Education is a key determinant of economic success, yet Noongar people experience barriers to accessing quality education. Lower levels of educational attainment limit employment prospects and income potential. While there have been improvements in education among Indigenous populations, significant gaps remain in secondary and tertiary education completion rates. Health inequities. Poor health outcomes also contribute to economic disadvantage. Indigenous Australians are more likely to suffer from chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and lower life expectancy. These health challenges directly impact work capacity, income generation, and overall economic stability within Noongar communities. Systemic racism and discrimination. Systemic discrimination in employment, housing, and access to services further compounds the economic struggles of Noongar people. Discrimination in the job market leads to higher unemployment rates, lower job security, and unequal pay compared to non-Indigenous Australians. Broader implications of economic disparity. The economic challenges faced by the Noongar people are part of a wider trend of poverty and disadvantage experienced by Indigenous Australians. The 10% income disparity when compared to mainstream spending highlights a larger issue of exclusion and inequality. These economic gaps not only limit access to basic necessities, such as food and housing, but also perpetuate cycles of poverty that are difficult to escape. Why this disparity is concerning. Intergenerational poverty. The income and wealth gaps experienced by Noongar communities often lead to intergenerational poverty. Children born into these circumstances are less likely to access quality education and healthcare, perpetuating the cycle of disadvantage. Social and cultural erosion. Economic hardship erodes the ability of Noongar people to maintain their cultural traditions and connection to land. With limited economic resources, traditional practices and knowledge transfer become more difficult to sustain, leading to the potential loss of cultural identity. Widening national inequality. The stark differences in economic outcomes between the Noongar people and the general population exacerbate national inequality. It is crucial for a cohesive society that all groups have equitable access to economic opportunities, and failure to address these disparities can lead to social instability and tension. Solutions and path forward. Addressing poverty among the Noongar people and closing the gap with the mainstream population requires targeted solutions that address both the systemic and immediate causes of disadvantage. These include employment initiatives. Creating job opportunities, especially within Noongar communities, is essential. Employment initiatives that respect cultural practices and provide pathways into industries like tourism, land management, and the arts can help bridge the income gap. Educational support. Increased investment in education, particularly early childhood and secondary education for Indigenous Australians, is critical. Mentorship programs and scholarships for Noongar students can also enhance educational outcomes. Why programs like Closing the Gap exist. Addressing historical disadvantage. Indigenous Australians, including the Noongar people, have historically experienced systematic marginalization, particularly since colonization. The Closing the Gap program is designed to redress the impact of this historical disadvantage, including land dispossession, forced assimilation policies, and exclusion from political and social systems. Health and well-being. Indigenous Australians experience poorer health outcomes compared to the mainstream population. This includes lower life expectancy, higher rates of chronic diseases, and reduced access to healthcare services. The Closing the Gap health targets aim to reduce these inequalities by improving access to healthcare, tackling preventable diseases, and addressing mental health issues. Education and employment. As mentioned in the summary, education is a crucial determinant of future income and well-being. Indigenous Australians, including the Noongar, face barriers in completing education and accessing skilled employment. The Closing the Gap program includes initiatives aimed at improving school attendance, literacy, and higher education participation, all of which are designed to lead to better employment opportunities and economic independence. Cultural preservation and self-determination. A vital aspect of the Closing the Gap strategy is respecting and preserving Indigenous cultures. It recognizes that cultural connection is essential for the well-being of Indigenous Australians, and that economic progress must be achieved in ways that align with cultural values. For the Noongar people, this means ensuring that initiatives respect their connection to the land and cultural traditions. Reducing economic inequality. The economic gap between Indigenous Australians and the broader population, as highlighted in your summary, is stark. The program focuses on increasing Indigenous employment rates, supporting Indigenous business ventures, and fostering community-led economic development projects that empower Indigenous Australians to have greater control over their economic futures. Progress and challenges. While the Closing the Gap initiative has seen some success in areas like increased school attendance and improved life expectancy, challenges remain. Many targets have not been fully met, which underscores the complexity of overcoming entrenched inequalities. Poverty, discrimination, and systemic barriers still affect Noongar and other Indigenous communities, requiring ongoing government attention and action. In summary, programs like Closing the Gap exist precisely to address the issues you've identified in your summary, to reduce the disparities in income, education, health, and well-being between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and to ensure that future generations have access to the same opportunities for success.